I'm Rhys Thomas. I'm Chief Revenue Officer at Totalmobile, placed here by Ryan some 2.5 years ago. Totalmobile is a UK headquartered SaaS business. We specialise in field service management, asset lifecycle management and workforce management.
Thanks, Rhys. How is it that you got into what you do? What led you into this kind of career path? Was it fate or by design?
Both, actually. So initially, definitely fate. I mean, if I go all the way back to my first sales job, if you like, I was literally kicking around at home after graduating with a sociology degree from Manchester University. That doesn't give you an obvious career path. And my mum, actually, I think, was fed up with me sitting around at home for a few months. And I remember she cut this little ad out of the Times, I think. It was literally out of the newspaper, about a 1-inch by 1-inch advert advertising sales jobs. And I rang the number. It was actually an advert placed by a recruiter, funny enough, Ryan. Long story short, I ended up with a sales job with a company called Pitney Bowes, which was a great school for selling franking machines, which is mailing machines, the things to put a red book an envelope. I mean, you couldn't get a steeper learning curve in a way. They gave you 2 weeks training in Harlem and Essex, some demo kit and a Vauxhall Cavalier and some postcodes, and you literally had to go door to door, walking into people's premises. But it gave a phenomenal, I suppose, grounding in largely pipeline generation and closing, because I had to do about probably four or five deals a week and to book 12 appointments every week. And I did that for 3 years and, had a great grounding into the sort of basics of sales. It was all a bit headless. I then went traveling for a year. I didn't have enough money to do that without having to work. And at Pitney Bowes, I'd met my then girlfriend, now wife, and we both worked there and we both decided that we'd go traveling together for a year, which is kill or cure. Let me tell you. And when I came back, I rang a mate of mine because I needed to get back into work. A guy called Gavin Page, actually. He'd left Pitney Bowes as well, and he was working in a software company, and he said, you've got to get into software. And I made a great decision there, albeit by accident, in that I ended up joining a company called Parametric Technology Corporation, now known as PTC.
Yes.
And I was really lucky because, with software in its infancy at the time, that was a company where a lot of the sales methods, shall we say, the effective sales methods that get used in some great software companies today were developed. You hear people like John McMahon and Jeremy Dunn and people like that. They were all there. I think there's a stat, there's something like 60 plus CROs worldwide that were, like me, sales reps back in the mid-90s working at PTC. And it's where things like Medic or MedPick, as it's often referred to now, was invented. And it's where the development of a sort of customer-centric sales process, which again is used in various guises today in some of the most effective software sales companies, was developed. And I was lucky enough to work there then and pick up a lot of those tools, which have stayed with me throughout my career. But I then, having left there, probably went into the wilderness a bit because I wasn't being deliberate about my career. I was kind of consciously or unconsciously competent in a lot of ways. I was effective. I was a kind of high-performing salesperson, but I wasn't really conscious about my career. And then, the company that you managed to wrinkle me out of, I joined them some years later, a company called BMC Software, a great company, again, great people. And I was there for 13 years. And I was saying it was while I was there that I learned to take control of my career, because I found myself back in an environment where there was a real cultural focus on development and progressing people. So that was a great experience. And, consequently, with me becoming conscious about this and being in an environment where it was valued, I was developed. I was back on a very steep learning curve, and I think I was promoted at least 5, probably 6 times in the 30 years I was there. And that's where I transitioned from being an individual contributor to become a senior sales leader in a relatively short time.
Yeah, certainly those three places, BMC, PTC and Pitney Bowes, if we see that individuals have worked at those places, we know there's probably some, and they've survived there and they've spent a good amount of time there. They're probably quite good at what they do, at least very good at selling. And I'm sure we'll come back to it in a second, but I think what you said around BMC and just the development of individuals and the fact that you worked there and you were able to treat sort of sales and sales leadership as a career, and they had that, I think is fantastic. So if we bring it to current day, what's the most challenging part of your job?
It's a lot. If you think about what's involved in the job, you've got business planning, you've got strategy, you've got recruitment, coaching and development, which I mentioned earlier, PR, customer success, pipeline management, stakeholder management, sales, marketing, pre-sales. the list goes on. So at the risk of sounding a bit, like a bit of a cliche, probably managing my time is one of the most challenging parts of the job. I'm very deliberate with my operating rhythm, both listed mine. So I make sure that I'm allowing enough time for all of these things and at communicating it and sticking to it. But all the same, probably that retention of my operating rhythm is the most challenging part of the job. Although, Ryan, if you ask me the same question next week, I'll probably give you a completely different answer depending on what's on fire.
Yes. I mean, this is slightly off-piste a little bit, but for those that might be challenged around sort of prioritizing and being disciplined, what is it that you do or try to do to overcome that challenge? If there's one or two things maybe that help you or might help others that have got a lot to do in a short space of time.
It's a good question. So you write it down.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, if you think about all those elements of the job that I talked about, that they become documented in a business plan, and you set different objectives against each one for yourself or for your team or whatever, and a plan to get there. That kind of informs the fact that there is a lot to do, but you know what, it has to be done, and that gives you the opportunity to then create an operating rhythm, a documented operating rhythm. So what are the things I need to do every week, and allow time for every week, every fortnight, every month, every quarter, every year even, right? And so, every week we're going to be doing forecasting as you'd expect, right? Every week I'm going to be doing one-to-ones with my direct reports. Every month I might do a sales meeting, or, every fortnight we do a recruitment call, and so on and so forth. So you write it all down, and then you communicate that, right? You communicate it, you can block off bits in your diary, and you should try and stick to it. That's not always going to be possible. But you communicate to your colleagues, your boss, people in your team, this is the operating rhythm, and that definitely helps because people understand, what I'm intending to do when, and it helps with, those interactions, I suppose.
Well, I guess the communication and the fact that people have a good sense of what you're doing means that they are pretty conscious of, I'm sure they're conscious of their time, but they're conscious of your time, right? So if they need something from you, I guess they probably want to make sure that it's, if they're going to address it with you, it's almost more important than the thing that you're having to do at that point in time.
Yeah, but listen, I'm the biggest beneficiary of writing it down. At least gives me the opportunity to be in control of it. At least I'm conscious of it. I didn't used to do that years ago, but the more responsibility you take on, the more complex, I suppose, the role becomes, the more critical that is. But I would advise anybody in any role to give it a go.
Maybe related, but what are the biggest lessons that you've learned?
The first, it'll sound like a bit of a cliche is again, but something I learned quite early on was the importance of focusing on the other person at every opportunity, whether that is customer, a colleague, a partner. And I think that's essential in maintaining effective relationships and in creating and protecting long-term sustainable success. Another one, definitely got my head around this with help of some other people at BMC, was if you're going to grow effective, high-performing sales teams, you need a system. If you read or listen to some of the great sports coaches, for instance, they talk about the same thing, right? They talk about having a system that encompasses the right training, the right coaching methods, picking the right team, game plans, tactics, playbooks, nutrition, culture, all of these things. For us in enterprise software sales, whilst the elements of the system are slightly different, there's a lot of parallels, coaching, development, recruitment, business planning, culture, your recruitment criteria, your sales plays, your competitive analysis, your sales process, your qualification framework, effective forecasting, the list goes on, right? And so without a system that you absolutely live and breathe by, it's very difficult to consistently stay at the top of your game. So you need to fall back on that system. And by the way, that's not an individual thing either. It needs to be something that, the team around you, the team above you, the team below you, whatever, are all bought into, because definitely going to sound like a cliche now, but teamwork is absolutely fundamental to that, to executing effectively to that system, within that system.
As you describe it, that system sounds pretty holistic and certainly not something that just one person can do, right? So you need the people around you.
It's quite interesting, actually. If everyone's not kind of bought into that way of working, I think it's very difficult, because it usually involves a lot of change, and people are naturally resistant to change. So having a strong team around you who also value this way of working is incredibly important if you're going to effectively navigate a lot of change in a relatively small amount of time. You know, when I joined, probably the thing I was most worried about, right, was I'd come from an environment where that way of working was regarded as the right thing to do, and I was going to come and almost impress this onto a team of people that weren't used to necessarily operating in this way. And, you know, my concern was that, you know, I was going to get a lot of resistance to that amount of change and a different way of working and so on. But, you know, it turns out that I was worrying unnecessarily, as, you know, because there was very smart people there who were coachable, you know, were keen to try and learn new ways of working. So they actually adopted it really well, embraced it really well, and we're getting great results, as you alluded to earlier, you know, as a result. And we're seeing 45% productivity improvement over the last couple of years. And of course, then it becomes self-fulfilling.
Absolutely. Clearly, you've got a lot on your plate with early on and probably now quite big decisions to make. But where do you draw inspiration? So where do you go? Is it coaches, mentors, your vegetable patch that you mentioned?
Yeah, the vegetable patch is a new thing in my life. So I've had some amazing coaches and mentors over the years, and a lot of the things I've just talked about have come from them, not me. I've learned this stuff by working with some great people. But in terms of ideas and whatnot, again, you asked me think about things I've learned. One of the things I've learned is you need to allow yourself some thinking time. I do put that in my published operating rhythm, but that is the thing that tends to fall off the end of the desk when, you know, the proverbial hits the fan. So what do I do outside of work that allows me that thinking time? There's probably a couple of things. Mowing the lawn. Yeah, quite a big lawn. It takes about 2 hours to mow it, the ride-on mower. And the other one is salmon fishing. Is a bit of a passion of mine. Those are both solitary and quite metronomic activities. And honestly, it does allow me to sort of think. So I probably have more good ideas in the summer.
Yes. It's interesting, right? Because you talked about great mentors and coaches, but I think we all need to get away from the desk and the computer and the business from time to time and just spend that time alone, right? I think that's really important. I know we're all quite different, but I could see how sitting on a lawnmower or standing in a river might help the juices flow. And then sort of back to maybe a bit about what you were talking about before. What advice could you give, maybe just top level advice around building a high performing team, or perhaps like if I was someone that wanted to build a high performing team in a new sales lead role, like what advice could you give me? What's the one bit of advice that you give maybe your sales leaders?
So as I've already said, right, working to a system is really important, but there are a few things, particularly at the beginning, within that system that are absolutely critical, right? So the first one is you need to hire well, and you always need to be hiring well, right? So you can't compromise, because implementing that system is so much easier, and life becomes so much easier when you're working with great people, and you have to allow the time and the energy for this. Second, make sure you onboard well. You need to be very deliberate about that. Do not pass go, do not collect £200 until you've invested properly in onboarding your new hires. Even when they are onboarded, you know, we talk about people being productive within however many months, but they should pivot almost immediately from an onboarding plan to a development plan.
Yes.
Because if people are developing, this has been my experience, that's the reason they will stay. You know, you want to be growing your tenure. High tenured people are extremely valuable, not just because they're highly productive, but because they're your leaders, they're your successors, they're your coaches. Customers value them because they're knowledgeable and committed. The other thing that, again, I would absolutely focus on is pipeline generation. And what I mean by that is creating a culture where pipeline generation and the activity and the time allowed for it is valued by everybody. Otherwise, it's a massive arm wrestle, and everyone needs to be bought into that, because without continuous pipeline generation, it is absolutely impossible to build a team of consistent high achievers.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the bits within building the system, so hiring right, onboarding well is great. I guess if someone hasn't built their system or doesn't understand what they look like, then that's probably the first thing they need to think through and work through. And the pipeline thing, I thought it was really interesting, because you said that was the first thing you learned at Pitney Bowes. It was build pipeline and then close.
Literally, it was as I said, I had to knock on doors, right, and talk about building discipline. We literally used to walk into, I don't know, a traffic agent or an estate agent, or, you know, anyway you could actually, or office blogs, knock on the door and ask for a compliment slip and start asking them how many letters they sent, how many packages they sent in order to look for some pain around.
Yes.
The act of sending letters out. And you had to literally do that hundreds of times every week. So if you weren't in an appointment, you were off, going through the shoe leather doing that. But it meant that on a Monday then when in the office, you had this big Polly pocket full of compliment slips and you'd be hammering the phones until you booked your 12 meetings. What were you going to do otherwise?
My first job landing in the UK was industrial estate to industrial estate selling accident insurance. That taught me a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I really value it. It remains ingrained in my DNA.
Sometimes you just gotta do the uncomfortable stuff, right? To get
enjoy it. You need character, and that's still part of my hiring criteria is character. And then there's the obvious stuff with character being tough and whatnot, being able to take rejection and all that sort of stuff. Everyone knows, but there's more to it, right? There's integrity and customer centricity and respect for your colleagues and all the things that you want in a great teammate. And that's a critical element.
If you think about the best revenue leader that you've worked with, what do you think makes or made them successful? Again, if there's like one thing, I'm sure there's many things, but for you think of that person, what was it?
So I'm not thinking of one person because I've been influenced by so many great revenue leaders, and they're very different. Some are very charismatic. You think about people like Jason Andrew, Jim Dara, incredibly charismatic. Others are very structured and very focused and systematic. Ray Rhys now incredibly systematic and incredibly disciplined and focused. Marcos Delgado, who I worked with at BMC, was an absolute Jedi Knight at operating a system. Eric Lightfoot is another. Whilst they're all very different, and if they had a baby, it'd be a very ugly baby, but a phenomenal leader, and what they all have in common is they're super smart,
yes.
They're great communicators, and they lead by example, every one of them.
Obviously, we're talking about individuals, revenue leaders. That's really insightful. When you assess or diagnose a go-to-market function, it could be a smaller team within an organization that you've taken on, or it could have been Totalmobile, whatever. What's the first thing that you're looking for? Like, what's the first piece of information that you feel you need to get your hands on to understand where the business is?
Pipeline. We've already talked about it, but whenever I take on a new team, I always start there. And the reason for that is, one, almost inevitably, they won't have enough.
They might think they do, but they probably won't.
They probably don't even think they do. The chances are they won't have enough. In fact, my experience, and I've taken on a lot of teams and grown a lot of teams, they've never had enough pipeline on day one. The reason I always start there when I'm taking on a team, because it's really difficult to assess the other things, whether that's your people, your forecast cadence, the effectiveness of your sales process, your sales messaging. It's really difficult to teach or coach or mentor or even retain people if they don't have enough pipeline. And a lack of pipeline will turn the best salesperson into an average one because it will change their behavior. A great salesperson without pipeline is still making fundamental mistakes, clinging on to opportunities that if they had better opportunities, they would probably kick into the long grass and qualify out. I always start by focusing on building pipeline, and I always focus on creating an environment, people value that and prioritize that, because when you then have pipeline, and as I say, you probably never feel like you've got enough, but when you have an amount of pipeline, and I'll put that into some sort of context, we've almost got 3 times as much pipeline today in Totalmobile than the day I started. And it just creates a great environment then where people can learn, people can develop, people can thrive, but also it gives me the opportunity to really be far more effective at identifying the real issues within the go-to-market function that we should be addressing at any given time, because it's really hard to do that when people are chasing shadows and chasing audit qualified pipe.
That all makes perfect sense. I think it's Will, my business partner, says it's creating a bow wave to the point where you have to make it happen, but things just start to happen. Just a quick one just to finish off. I think when we first started talking, you I think you mentioned something about the flying car. You'd be quite interested, and it was hypothetical, but you were thinking, something like that as a next step, something quite different could be cool. But is there a particular sort of trend in the tech space that excites you most, or perhaps anything that you're seeing within your business or the market that you operate in?
One of my criteria, I've got various criteria for, companies that I regard suitable for me to work within, right? One is the space that they're in is growing. Another is that the type of product lends itself well to the way I like to sell. The way I have always sold is a kind of very business case centric sales process. I think that's a customer centric sales process as well, because customers need a business case to buy enterprise software always. What I've observed is that it's easier to do that if you're selling some sort of automation capability. With Totalmobile, we're definitely a company that helps people improve efficiency and automate. So this whole new wave of AI will lend itself very well to what we do. And it's something that we are investing heavily and very focused on. John, our CTO, and Chrissy, our Chief Product Officer, who are both super smart and very progressive, are really focused on leveraging that advantage for our customers and leveraging that opportunity for our customers, because there are so many use cases that AI will help our customers become more efficient and effective, and that will help with delivering more for less, cost benefit, ESG ambitions, all the things that are board level requirements for these guys. So I'm excited about that. I think we are investing in the right area there, because it's going to create, real differentiation and for us, and real benefit for our customers.
Brilliant. Well, it's nice that Totalmobile is able to take advantage of, what is happening at the forefront of technology, which is obviously AI. So yeah, it'd be very interesting to see what comes. Rhys, thanks a lot for your time today. You're a good man, and it's good to stay in touch with you, and good that things are going well. Really appreciate your time.
Pleasure, Ryan. No, great to see you.